Hey guys, Brock here. Welcome to another video. Here I am sheltering in place in my backyard, and today I'm going to give you a comparison video of a few smartphones. So recently I purchased the Galaxy S20 Ultra, that's this guy up here, and I've been using it and I noticed it was a little bit different from what I was used to with previous phones, and so I still have my Galaxy S9 Plus for a little while. I do need to send it back for a little bit of a rebate to help make the price of this thing a little bit more bearable. But while I had it here, I decided to do a comparison between Galaxy S9 Plus and the Galaxy S20 Ultra. And I figured I'd go a little bit farther back as well and use my other Samsung phones. So I've got the Galaxy S7, the Galaxy S4. I was going to do the Galaxy S2, but unfortunately that guy is just old, and I had trouble resuscitating it. So all that being said, I'm going to be doing a comparison of different resolutions for video, primarily starting at 1080p, going up to UHD, and then of course this guy does 8K, so I'm going to be comparing that. This video is uploaded at 4K 60, so obviously you won't be seeing the 8K at true resolution, but perhaps I'll upload a separate video of just it by itself at 8K if you have an 8K monitor to even watch it on. But anyway, I will do my best to keep you updated as to what resolution each phone is set at when I'm recording. I also have a GoPro Hero 7 Black here, just for comparison's sake, because that guy does go up to 4K 60. And yeah, I will compile all that together and show you what I got. So let's get started. Alright, first thing that I want to go over here, the footage you're looking at right now is straight out of the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra 5G. I have not altered it. This is how the footage came straight out of the phone. Basically, I recorded it, plugged the phone into my computer, copied it over, and then just brought it into Premiere. As you can see, it looks overexposed, it's bright. This is not a good look. This is not something that you would want to see, especially if you just spent a lot of money on this new phone. So I was seeing this a lot, and I did a little bit of research. I tried recording in different lighting situations. I played with the settings, and long story short, what I came across is this is actually because I had the option for HDR10 turned on the phone. Depending on what settings you choose, in this case at UHD 30 frames per second, I had the option of HDR10. And I don't know if it was turned on by default or if I toggled it and then it was just left on, but when I switched to any settings that allow HDR10, it was turning on by default. And so actually when I was bringing this footage into my computer, I was very disappointed and I thought there was something wrong, but digging into it, it's actually not a bad thing. So, quick primer, there's a difference between auto HDR or rich tone mode, which previous phones had, and HDR10. And actually the Galaxy S20 has both of those options. So right now what you're looking at is something that was recorded with HDR10 without auto HDR or rich tone mode. Now, with this HDR10, it's actually capturing a higher bitrate and more data, so the file has more for me to play with. So as you can see right now, I'm bringing down the exposure, and all of the detail in the shadows, all the detail in the highlights that looked like it was gone is actually preserved because of that HDR10 codec and saving options. In Premiere, because I don't have an HDR monitor, it doesn't know what to do with it, and so when it displays it for me, it just looks blown out, and so you just have to know how to deal with it. Now the video that I'm exporting is going to be a standard video. It's not going to be an HDR video, so I'm going to end up throwing away most of the information once I bring down the exposures. And so that's just something to be aware of. Now you can turn the HDR10 mode off. So again, this is with HDR10 turned on. This is without HDR10 but with auto HDR turned on. This is with neither HDR mode turned on. And this is with both HDR modes turned on. So you can toggle them independently, again, depending on what settings you choose. And just for reference, this is footage from the Galaxy S9 with auto HDR turned on. And this is without auto HDR turned on. And so I'm going to put them side by side here, and you can see which quadrant is which, just for comparison's sake. So it's worth noting that if you do record something with HDR10, it's going to look fine on the phone because the display on the phone is HDR certified, and so it looks exactly as it should. But if you don't want to deal with the HDR footage, if you're just uploading it to Instagram or Facebook or whatever, anytime you use the share button in the gallery and you are choosing an HDR10 embedded video, it will automatically convert that to a standard video for you. And it could take a little bit more time, so I actually wanted to compare. So this is what it looks like, again, straight out of the camera, HDR without any adjustments. This is what it looks like when I make the adjustment in Premiere. And this is what it looks like when I convert it in the phone. And so here's a split screen of converted in Premiere versus converted in the phone. You can see it's very similar. So just know that you do have options available. For me, I will probably leave HDR10 turned on when possible. It's worth noting that at 4K 60 and at 8K resolution, HDR10 is just not even an option. And I'm assuming that's because it requires too much data. Another thing to note is anytime you record 8K footage, it is switching to HEVC mode. So that's H.265 as opposed to H.264. And so that's just another thing that you can't disable. Anytime you record 8K, that's what it's doing. So without further ado, I'm going to get into some more comparisons. But again, really quickly, this is the Galaxy S9 with no HDR. Galaxy S9 with auto HDR, the Galaxy S20 with nothing, Galaxy S20 with auto HDR, Galaxy S20 with HDR10 and an adjustment made in Premiere, and then the Galaxy S20 with both auto HDR and HDR10 with an adjustment in Premiere. And then here's a quad view, and then we'll move right along. So looking at the phone screens themselves, the S4 is really washed out. The other phones look fine, which obviously the newer screens look better. But even the S7, which I'm kind of moving right now, the back of the screen looks a little bit dark, but otherwise it's fine. So this is at 1080p 30. I'm going to zoom in as far as I can on the S4, which is a 4x zoom, and I'm going to tell it to focus right in the middle of the frame. Then I'm going to do the S7 to 4x and focus in the middle of the frame. Then the S9 Plus, I'm going to go to 4x. A little finicky. Do the middle of the frame, and then the S20, going to go to 4x. And focus. So they're basically all focusing on that fence now. Okay. I'm going to let that run for a little bit. So on the Z7, I'm going to actually zoom in until it sort of matches the S20, which is about right there. So it looks like about 50 millimeter. I was at 35 millimeter. Now I'm at 50. So that's at 4x, which on the S20 should be optical. Let's see how far I can go on the S7. I can go to 8. Again, I'm going to focus on the fence. on the S9 Plus. This is 8 here, focusing on the fence. Then the S20, gonna go to 8. And then focus on that wall. So obviously at this point the S20 looks the best. You can see the noise on all the other ones. And on the Z7 I'm going to zoom in as well. This is 70mm on the Z7. Okay, so I think that's maxed out on the S7. It is. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in as far as I can on the S9 Plus. And that looks like about 10x. So I'm going to go to 10x on the S20. And that would be right here. And then obviously I could go even farther on the S20. So let's push it as far as we can. 20x. And then I'll make it focus on that wall. Alrighty. So now these are zoomed in as far as they will zoom. So right now they're all zoomed out as far as I can. The Nikon is at 35mm, which is pretty close to what these guys are seeing. Actually, they may be a little bit wider, so let's go to about maybe 28mm is the widest for most of them. And they all look pretty similar at their widest. Okay. I'm not going to focus too much on the S4 because, like I said, it's maxed out at 1080p 30, and I've already run that test. Now, it's worth noting that I told all of the phones to focus on the leaves, which is the darkest thing in the shot, and since they're focusing on the leaves, the whole thing brightened. So the sky is kind of blown out. It's overcast today. That's to be expected. But the S7, everything looks much darker. We'll have to see what the actual footage looks like. Obviously, you're looking at it right now, but on the display itself, it looks pretty dark. So I'm just going to zoom in as far as I can on the S7. So this is at 8x on the S7, and I'll do the same 8x on the S9 to compare. This is 8x on the S9. The S9 has way more detail as far as what I'm seeing right now on the phone itself. And then the S20, let's zoom in to 8x. Okay, and then I'll tell you to focus on the fence. So it's really tough to tell. It looks like there's more detail in the S9 Plus than the S20, but due to the arrangement, the S20 is not looking at the fence, so it's a little difficult to tell. Now the S20 does look like it has less noise, but that could be noise removal in the phone, which is not ideal, so hopefully that's not the case. And then I'll just zoom in on the Nikon to 70mm, which is not quite as far as 10x on the S20, but it's a reference nonetheless. Okay, now on the S9 I'm going to go to 10x, which is as far as it'll go, and I can see plenty of noise here. And then on the S20 I'm going to go to 10x as well, which is also its max zoom at this resolution and frame rate. So right now I'll go ahead and zoom in on the S4 just for comparison's sake. That's 4 times on the S4, 8x on the S7, 10x on the S9 Plus and the S20 Ultra. And the Nikon is at 70 millimeter. The GoPro is also at 1080p 60. And what's interesting about the different phones is you get different resolutions, different zoom options depending on what settings you choose. And I'm assuming it's because on the newer phones anyway, with the multiple lenses, only certain lenses are able to record video. And so when I was doing 1080p 30, I had the option to zoom in 20x on the Galaxy S20 Ultra, but when I was doing 1080p 60, I could only go 10x. So that's interesting. Now with the S20, I have the option of 0.5x, so that's the wide angle lens. So I'm going to go ahead and start recording at the wide angle, just so that we can compare. The GoPro is set to super view, it is not set to wide, and the GoPro is just for reference anyway, just because. So I'm not worried too much about the settings of the GoPro. Now you can see on the S20 over here on the side, that is the side of the building, which was not visible until I went to the wide angle lens. So I'm going to actually move the entire rig a little bit over. So about right there, looks like it gets rid of that. And we'll continue from here. It looks like the S7 is actually doing a better job than it was prior, so I may not have told it to focus on the leaves on the last test, but we should be able to see here a good comparison. Obviously the S4 is only doing 1080p 30, that's where it maxed out. I'll go ahead and do the zoom in, so 4x, although we've seen that before. Now the S7, the S9 Plus, and the S20 are recording at 4K 30. The S20 is using the wide angle lens right now, so I'm going to go ahead and put it at 1x. So now all three of those are at 1x, and the Nikon is at 28 millimeter, which is more or less the same as the phones. If I zoom in on the S7, we can go to 8x is the farthest it'll let me go. On the S9 Plus, I'll go to 8x, which is right here. And on the S20, I'll go to 8x. Okay, so that's 8x, telling to focus on that fence. So the S7 is a blurry mess as far as I can tell just looking at the back of the phone. The S9 has more detail but also noise, and the S20 is doing a fantastic job. I believe this is an optical zoom pretty much at this point, so it should be. I don't see much noise. Of course, when I look on the computer, I may see more than I see on the phone itself, but so far so good. I'm going to actually zoom in on the Nikon as well to let's say 70 millimeter and refocus. Okay, so with the S9, I can actually go to 10x, and with the S20, I can go to 10x as well. There's actually a little button for 10x. So you have half x, 1, 2, 4, 10, and I didn't even see what the last one was, but I'll get to it in a minute. So right now, the S4 is at 4x, the S7 is at 8x, the S9 and S20 Plus are both at 10x, and make sure it's focusing just so that we can compare. So they are both now in focus. On the S20, I can go to 20x at this resolution and frame rate. And I'm telling it to focus on that wall. And unfortunately, there's not much detail in that wall, so you know, it is what it is. But it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. Okay, I've got the Nikon running at 4K 30 because that's where it tops out. The GoPro is running at 4K 60, which does not give it the option of super view or whatever it's called. It is doing wide view right now. The S4 topped out a long time ago at 1080p 30. Just going to go ahead and start recording on that guy. The S7 is going to do 4K 30. That's where it topped out. And I'm telling everything to focus on those leaves. Alrighty, so the S9 Plus is going to be recording at 4K 60. It's worth noting that this is where I pretty much always left it when it was my daily go-to camera. And I've got the S20 Ultra running also at 4K 60. An interesting note, again, I mentioned earlier that you get different options when you've got different settings. It would not allow me on the S20 Ultra to switch to 4K 60 while I had it in 16:9 mode. I had to switch to the dedicated 8K 16:9 mode and then choose 4K 60. So I think it's using, it's recording 8K and then cropping down or doing pixel binning or something, but I had to switch from 16:9 to 8K 16:9, which is a little weird that those are even two different options. But anyway, everything is recording right now. And yeah, so let's just get into it. So for the S4, I'm going to go ahead and zoom into 4x. You've seen this, it's 1080p at 30. Not much to say about it. The S7, I'm going to go ahead, let me just do 4x as well, just to compare. I'm going to go to the S9, do 4x. And then the S20 do 4x, which has a little button for it. And we'll focus on that fence. So now, these four phones are at 4x. I'm going to zoom in to, let's say, 50 millimeter on the Nikon. That might be close. Actually, it looks like it's a little bit farther than that. So let's go to 70. 70 looks pretty close. So I'm at 70 millimeters on the Nikon Z7, and The Galaxy S4 is at 1080p 30, 4x zoomed in. The S7 is at UHD 30, 4x zooming in. The S9 Plus is at UHD 60, 4x, and the S20 Ultra is at UHD 60, 4x. Okay. And of course the GoPro is 4K 60, just there's no zoom function, it just is what it is. Now let's zoom in on the S7. I'm going to max it out at 8x. And then on the S9 we'll go to 8x, which is here. That's 8.1, it's close enough. And then on the S20 Ultra we'll go to 8x, which 7.9, it's close enough. So if you aren't aware, the newer cameras, they have little quick buttons when you start zooming to go to certain zoom levels, but 8x is not one of them. 10x is, so that's why it's a little bit difficult. I have to pinch to zoom to get it to the number that I want it to get to. But telling this guy to focus on the fence, just looking at the back of the cameras, the back of the phones, it looks like the S9 has way more detail than the S20 Ultra does right now, which is interesting and a bit concerning. Now the S9 does have a lot of noise, and so again, it could be that the S20 Ultra is doing some kind of noise reduction, which I don't want noise reduction. I want you to give me the raw footage and I'll apply noise reduction myself if I want to, but this is straight out of the camera, so it is what it is. On the S9 Plus, I'm going to zoom in as far as I can, which is 10x, and on the S20 Ultra, 10x is also the max at this resolution setting. So now the S4 is at 4x, the S7 is at 8x, the S9 and the S20 are both at 10x. Alright, so here we finally have the 8K resolution video in true 1:1 scale. You can see that it is a little soft, but this is what you can expect out of the Galaxy S20 Ultra 5G. Now I do need to scale it down to 50% to give a nice comparison to the 4K footage coming out of the other phones. And for the Galaxy S4, since it's recording at 1080p, I'm actually going to scale that footage up, just so that we have something that is easier to compare. You will note that the Galaxy S20 punches in a little bit, so it's not quite as wide when you're recording in 8K, and that's just something that you'll have to get used to. Something else to note is that the Galaxy S20 Ultra is limited to 24 frames per second when recording at 8K resolution. I did not realize this at the time of recording because the phone UI does not show what frame rate it's using, even though the other resolutions do stipulate whether it's 60 frames per second or not. So I just assumed it was 30 frames per second, and I recorded all these other clips at 30 frames per second. But when I brought the footage into Premiere, I learned that it was actually 24 frames per second. So that's something to keep in mind. The S20 Ultra right now is at 8K. It is at 1x. When you go to 8K mode, you're only allowed to zoom into 6x, which is more than enough. You've got 8,000 pixels. So yeah, this is at 1x. You can go ahead and zoom in. It gives me some quick buttons for 2x, 4x, and 6x. And I'll just make sure it focuses. It's a little soft at 6x, but I mean, you're getting 8K resolution, so I wouldn't complain too much. For this last section, I really wanted to check and see if there was a tangible benefit to recording at 8K resolution on the Galaxy S20 Ultra versus just taking 4K footage from another phone and scaling it up to 8K. If for some reason you do need 8K resolution, I think you can see here that there is a pretty clear quality difference to recording at 8K on the Galaxy S20 Ultra versus up-resing from the other two phones that record at 4K. Now, the Nikon does hold its own, but again, that is a mirrorless camera, not a mobile phone. And so the sensor is much larger and therefore is capturing more detail, and that's why it tends to hold its own compared to the phones. So if for some reason you do need 8K resolution video, the Galaxy S20 Ultra is not a bad option. But again, you are still going to be getting phone quality. It's a bit soft, and you can see for yourself, it's not the best thing in the world, but you know, to get a phone and a camera all in one that shoots 8K resolution, not a bad deal. Alright guys, that's where I'm going to leave you today. If you've made it this far, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like as well. By the way, if there are any other questions about the Galaxy S20 Ultra, specifically the camera, anything that I didn't clarify, please add comments below and I will try to answer those for you. I did send the Galaxy S Plus back to Samsung, so I don't have that guy for capturing footage anymore, but any questions specifically related to the Galaxy S20 Ultra, I will try to help you guys out. So with that, have a great day. Bye.